The shattered silence. Natalie Brooks had mastered the art of being present yet unseen. For 3 years, she had occupied the desk outside Dominic Sterling's corner office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Enterprises, managing his impossible schedule with quiet efficiency. She knew how he took his coffee, black with 1 sugar cube dissolved exactly 30 seconds before drinking. She knew he rubbed his left temple when quarterly reports disappointed him. She knew the subtle shift in his voice when a deal was about to close. What she did not know was whether he ever truly saw her. The autumn afternoon started like any other. Natalie organized the monthly reports with practiced precision, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she compiled data that would shape million-dollar decisions. Through the glass wall separating her workspace from his office, she could see Dominic on a conference call, his sharp features set in concentration. Sunlight caught the edge of his jaw, and she forced herself to look away. These small moments of noticing had become dangerous. They fed a hope she had no right to nurture. The unexpected delivery when the flowers arrived. Natalie assumed they were for one of the executives. Sterling Enterprises received corporate arrangements daily, but the delivery person stopped at her desk, setting down a crystal vase filled with pale pink roses. Natalie Brooks, the young woman confirmed, extending a clipboard. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed. The card read simply, "Looking forward to tonight, Tyler Matthews." They had been friends since university, losing touch after graduation until he reached out 3 weeks ago. Two dinners had followed, pleasant conversations about old memories and new possibilities. He was kind, successful, uncomplicated. Everything logical suggested she should be excited about where this might lead. Yet as she arranged the roses on her desk, her mind wandered to the man behind the glass wall. Dominic Sterling, untouchable and unattainable, who probably did not even register her existence beyond her professional capabilities. The storm brakes office door slammed open with such force that Natalie jumped, nearly knocking over her coffee. Dominic stood in the doorway, and something was terribly wrong. His usual composed demeanor had cracked. His grey eyes, normally cool and assessing, burned with an emotion she could not name. "My office, now." The words were clipped, sharp as glass. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs as she followed him inside. The door clicked shut with ominous finality. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. He turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Who is sending you flowers?" The question stunned her. "Excuse me." "The flowers." He gestured toward her desk with barely controlled agitation. "Pink roses this morning, yellow tulips yesterday, white lila the day before." "Who is he?" Heat flooded her cheeks. It was true. Tyler had been sending daily arrangements, a romantic gesture she found both flattering and slightly overwhelming. But why would Dominic notice? Why would he care? "I did not realize you paid attention to who receives flowers in this office," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I do not." The response came too quickly, too defensively. "But you have been leaving at 5 o'clock sharp. You used to stay late. Now you disappear the moment the clock strikes 5. And you are different." "Different how?" His jaw tightened. "Happier." The single word felt like a confession, torn from somewhere deep inside him. Natalie stared at him, genuinely confused. "Dominic, I do not understand why this matters to you. How long have you been seeing him?" He took a step closer, and she caught the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive and cedar-tinged. "Who is he? Is it serious?" The questions were far too personal, crossing boundaries that should exist between employer and employee. Yet beneath his interrogation, Natalie sensed something else, something that made her pulse race with dangerous hope. Memory surfaces than she remembered. 2 weeks ago, Lauren from accounting had received an elaborate arrangement from her boyfriend. Dominic had walked past, offering congratulations. He had smiled, saying she was fortunate to have someone who valued her publicly. 2 weeks ago, Natalie said slowly, finding unexpected courage, Lauren received flowers. You walked past her desk and congratulated her. You said she was lucky to have someone who valued her publicly. Dominic went completely still. So why? Natalie continued, her voice gaining strength. Were you happy for her? But with me, you look furious. The silence that followed was deafening. She watched emotions flicker across his face. The careful control he prided himself on slipping. His hand rose to run through his dark hair, a gesture she had never witnessed in 3 years. It spoke of frustration, of barriers crumbling. Then understanding crashed over both of them simultaneously. This was not professional concern. This was jealousy, raw and undeniable. The retreat, you are right, Dominic finally said, his voice rough with emotion he could not quite conceal. He turned away, as if unable to meet her eyes. That was inappropriate. I apologize. He walked to his desk, putting the heavy wood between them like a fortress wall. You can go. Have a good evening, Natalie. But his shoulders remained rigid, his hands not quite steady as they gripped the desk edge. Dismissal and something else, something that sounded like barely restrained anguish. Natalie turned toward the door, her mind spinning. Her fingers touched the cool metal handle. Then she paused, a question burning through her confusion. Why had he reacted that way? And why, for the first time in 3 years, did she feel like perhaps she had never been invisible at all? Perhaps he had been seeing her all along, and that terrified him as much as it terrified her. She pulled the door open and stepped out, leaving him alone with whatever truth he was not ready to face. But something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they had maintained had cracked, and through that crack, something powerful and undeniable was beginning to emerge. The morning after Natalie had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dominic's face. The fury barely contained in his grey eyes. The way his voice had cracked when he asked about Tyler. She replayed the confrontation endlessly, searching for meaning in every word, every gesture. She arrived at Sterling Enterprises an hour before her usual time, hoping the empty office would give her space to think. But when the elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, her breath caught. Dominic was already there, standing beside her desk, holding something in his hands. When he looked up and saw her, vulnerability flashed across his features before his professional mask slammed back into place. It happened so quickly she almost missed it, but she had spent 3 years learning to read the subtle shifts in his expression. Good morning, he said. The formality, almost painful, over yesterday's intensity. On her desk sat a coffee cup from the boutique cafe 3 blocks away. The one she had mentioned casually months ago during a late-night working session. Not the generic office coffee everyone else drank. A cappuccino with cinnamon. Exactly as she preferred it. Dominic, you did not have to do this, she said softly, setting down her bag. I was already in the area. The lie was transparent. She could hear it in the slight hesitation. Before he spoke, Natalie picked up the cup, warmth seeping into her palms. Then, unbidden, memories began flooding back. Moments she had dismissed, explained away, refused to examine too closely. 3 years of small gestures 18 months ago. She had stayed late finishing a critical presentation. Exhausted beyond words, she had skipped both breakfast and lunch. Around 8 in the evening, Dominic had appeared at her desk with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. You skipped meals. Do not make it a habit. His tone had been gruff, almost annoyed. But the gesture itself spoke differently. 2 years before that, when her mother had been hospitalized for emergency surgery, Natalie had told no one at work. She needed the job, could not afford to seem unreliable. Yet somehow Dominic had discovered the situation. He had personally restructured her schedule, insisting she work remotely until her mother recovered. When she returned, yellow flowers, her mother's favorites, had been waiting on her desk with an unsigned card that read, "Hoping for brighter days." 1 year ago, during a meeting with an important investor, the man had dismissed her contributions, referring to her as the secretary in a tone dripping with condescension. Dominic, who never raised his voice, who maintained professional composure in every situation, had looked at the investor with ice in his grey eyes. Miss Brooks is my personal assistant and one of the most valuable members of this organization. Without her insight, we would not be having this conversation. Apologize. Now, the investor, a man worth billions, had apologized immediately. 3 years of protection, 3 years of small kindnesses that she had convinced herself was simply professional courtesy from a decent employer. The question that changes everything: why do you do this? The question escaped before she could stop herself. Dominic looked up from his phone, genuine confusion in his eyes. Do what? Care about me? The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge. For a moment, something shifted in his expression. His lips parted, as if he might answer honestly. His eyes softened, and she glimpsed the man behind the CEO facade, vulnerable and uncertain. Then his phone rang, the shrill sound shattering the moment. He answered immediately, and within seconds, he had transformed back into the controlled, efficient executive handling a stock market crisis with surgical precision. Natalie watched the metamorphosis, watched him become untouchable again. But then he covered the phone with his hand, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Because you deserve someone who cares. The confession was so quiet, she almost missed it. Then he was back on the call, discussing market positions and investor confidence as if those words had not just altered the foundation of everything she thought she understood about the past 3 years. The collision of two worlds. Natalie sank into her chair, the cappuccino warming her shaking hands. Her phone buzzed against the desk. A text from Tyler. Dinner tonight. I have been thinking about you. She stared at the message, then looked through the glass wall into Dominic's office. He was on the phone, pacing with controlled energy, all business and efficiency. But for one devastating second, his eyes met hers through the glass. The intensity in that gaze made her breath catch. It was not professional. It was not casual. It was raw and honest and terrifying. She looked back at Tyler's text. Simple, uncomplicated, safe. Tyler was a genuinely good man who made her laugh, who had no power over her career, who represented a future without complexity or risk. But when her eyes returned to Dominic, the question burned through her mind like fire. Has he felt the same thing I've been feeling all this time? Or am I creating meaning where none exists? The jealousy deep in the next few days were excruciating. Dominic maintained professional distance during work hours, but Natalie caught him watching her. When Tyler called and she laughed at something he said, Dominic's jaw would tighten. When she left at 5 o'clock sharp to meet Tyler for dinner, she would glance back to find Dominic standing at his office window, hands in his pockets, watching her go with an expression that made her chest ache. On Thursday afternoon, Tyler sent another bouquet. This time, red roses. A dozen of them, bold, unromantic. Dominic walked past her desk, stopped, stared at the flowers for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back into his office. Closing the door with deliberate control, Natalie made a decision. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and knocked on his door. Come in. His voice was carefully neutral. She entered, closing the door behind her. We need to talk about what is happening here. Nothing is happening, he said. But he would not meet her eyes. Dominic, please, do not insult my intelligence. She took a breath, gathering courage. You have been different since Tyler started sending flowers. You have been watching me. You confronted me about who I was seeing. That is not nothing. He finally looked at her, and the pain in his grey eyes nearly undid her. What do you want me to say? Natalie, the truth. Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. Just tell me the truth. The silence stretched between them, thick with 3 years of unspoken feelings. Then his phone rang again. Another crisis, another fire to extinguish. But this time, he let it ring. The truth, he said slowly, is that I have been a coward for 3 years. The truth is that you walk into this office every morning and make it bearable. The truth is that when you smile at your phone, because he makes you laugh, I want to be the one making you smile. He stood, moving around his desk. The truth is that watching you fall for someone else is destroying me. And I have no right to feel that way, because I never had the courage to tell you how I felt. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. Why did you never say anything? Because I am your boss, he said, voice rough. Because there is a power imbalance that makes any confession from me inherently problematic. Because if I told you how I felt and you felt pressured to reciprocate, I would hate myself. I never wanted you to feel trapped, so instead, Natalie said softly, you left me feeling invisible. You were never invisible, Dominic said, and the intensity in his voice made her shiver. You have been the most visible thing in my life since the day you walked in here. I just did not know how to tell you, without crossing lines that should not be crossed. The invitation following morning, Dominic appeared at her desk before anyone else arrived. You are coming with me to the executive summit, he announced without preamble. This weekend, Mountain Lake Resort, 3 days. Natalie stared at him. The summit, Dominic. That event is exclusively for senior executives and board members. I have never attended. You are attending now, he said firmly. I need you there. There was something in his voice, not quite an order, closer to a plea. Why? She asked quietly. He met her eyes, and for once, there was no mask, no careful control, just honesty. Because I am tired of being a coward. Because I need 3 days away from this office to have the courage to say what I should have said 3 years ago. And because if I am going to lose you to him, I need you to know what you meant to me first. Natalie's phone buzzed. Another text from Tyler, asking about weekend plans. She looked at the message, then at Dominic, then back at her phone. Logic said choose. Tyler, safety, simplicity, a relationship without complications or power dynamics, but her heart was screaming something entirely different. I will go, she whispered. I will go to the summit with you. Relief and fear warred in Dominic's expression. Pack warm clothes. It gets cold in the mountains at night. He started to walk away, then stopped, turning back. Natalie, whatever happens this weekend, I want you to know that working with you these 3 years has been the best part of my life. Even if nothing changes between us, you need to know that. Then he was gone, leaving her standing at her desk with her phone still buzzing with unanswered messages from Tyler, her heart pounding with the knowledge that everything was about to change. Mountain Confessions helicopter ride to Mountain Lake Resort was quiet, tension humming between them like an electric current. Natalie watched the city give way to forests, then mountains, trying to process the enormity of what Dominic had revealed. 3 years of hidden feelings, carefully concealed behind professional boundaries. When they landed, the resort sprawled before them like something from a dream. Luxury cabins nestled among pine trees, a pristine lake reflecting the sunset, everything bathed in golden light. Welcome, Dominic said, offering his hand to help her from the helicopter. His fingers wrapped around hers, warm and steady, and neither of them let go immediately. That first evening, the executive summit began with a formal dinner. Natalie descended the large staircase in the deep emerald dress Dominic had insisted she needed for the event. It is part of the professional requirements, he had said. But the way he looked at her now said something entirely different. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, and when he saw her, he stopped breathing. His grey eyes traveled over her with an intensity that made heat flood her cheeks. You look stunning, he said, and there was nothing professional at his tone. At dinner, they were surrounded by powerful executives discussing mergers and market trends, but Dominic made a point of including Natalie in every conversation. This is Natalie Brooks, he told a venture capitalist from Singapore, the most capable person in this room, myself included. After dinner came a cocktail reception on the terrace overlooking the mountains. Natalie stood at the railing, breathing in the cool night air, when an unwelcome voice interrupted her peace. So you are Sterling's famous assistant. She turned to find Preston Blake, a corporate investor known for his aggressive tactics and wandering hands. He stood too close, his smile predatory. I must admit, Preston continued, eyes traveling over her inappropriately. When I heard Dominic was bringing his assistant to the summit, I expected someone more ordinary, but you were quite the pleasant surprise. Natalie stepped back, discomfort crawling up her spine. Mr. Blake, if you will excuse me. Preston, please, he said, moving closer. Tell me, darling, What exactly are the nature of your working arrangements with Sterling? Because I might have a position that would interest you." The insinuation was clear and repulsive. Before Natalie could respond, a hand settled on her waist, firm and protective. Dominic appeared beside her, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Blake," Dominic said, his voice soft but laced with danger. "Choose your next words very carefully." Preston laughed nervously. "Ah, Sterling, I was just getting acquainted with your lovely assistant. Miss Brooks is not available for your acquaintance," Dominic said coldly. "And if you value your investment portfolio, you'll walk away. Now." The threat was unmistakable. Preston, realizing he had crossed a line, retreated with muttered apologies. Natalie was trembling, but not from fear. From the way Dominic still held her, protective and possessive, and from the realization that he had just publicly claimed her in front of the industry's most powerful players. The dancing music drifted from the ballroom, something slow and romantic. Couples began moving onto the terrace dance floor, and Dominic turned to her, conflict and desire warring in his eyes. "Dance with me," he said. "Not a question. A need, Dominic," she whispered, but he was already pulling her gently onto the floor. And then they were dancing under the stars, his hand on her waist, hers on his shoulder, so close she could feel his heartbeat matching hers. The rest of the world faded until there was only this moment. This connection they could no longer deny. "I cannot pretend any more," Dominic whispered near her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Not when you are this close." Natalie closed her eyes, dizzy with longing. "Pretend what? That you are not everything." His voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. "That I have not been in love with you since the first month you worked for me. That watching you smile at another man does not make me want to tear the world apart." When she opened her eyes, his were inches away, grey and intense, and completely vulnerable. The music ended, but they did not move, could not move. His hand tightened on her waist, and she felt herself fling closer, drawn by 3 years of denied wanting. "Dominic," she breathed. He leaned in, and she tilted her face up, and their lips were a breath apart when a camera flash exploded in their faces. They separated instantly, the moment shattered. An event photographer capturing candid summit moments had inadvertently documented something far more intimate than a professional relationship. Reality crashed back in. Dominic ran his hand through his hair, frustration and longing etched across his features. "I apologize. That was inappropriate. I am your employer, and I should not have." "Do not," Natalie interrupted, her voice trembling. "Do not apologize for being honest when I have waited 3 years to hear the truth." His eyes snapped to hers, hope and fear mingling. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," she took a shaky breath, "that I tried seeing Tyler because I thought you would never notice me. I thought I was invisible to you, but you have been seeing me all along, have you not?" "Every single day," Dominic said, his voice rough. "Every moment." "Then why did you never tell me?" "Because I am your boss," he said, anguish clear in his voice. "Because of the power dynamics. Because if you felt pressured to return my feelings, I would never forgive myself. I needed you to choose freely, without any coercion." "And what about what I want?" Natalie asked, stepping closer. "What about my choice?" "You have been protecting me from a choice I might have wanted to make." Dominic stared at her, and she watched his legendary control crumbling. "What do you want, Natalie?" Before she could answer, his phone rang, an emergency requiring his immediate attention. He had to take it, had to shift back into CEO mode. But as he spoke about market positions and crisis management, his eyes never left hers. When he finally ended the call, he said quietly, "Come to my suite, please. We need to finish this conversation properly." The breaking point in his suite, with the door closed and the world locked out, Dominic finally let his guard completely down. He stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit mountains, and began to speak. "When you were hired 3 years ago, I was in a dark place. My entire life was work. I did not let anyone close because closeness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was weakness. But then you walked in with your genuine smile and your fierce competence. and something changed. He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. The first 6 months, I tried to ignore what I was feeling. You were my employee. It was wrong. But the more time I spent with you, the more I realized you were not just essential to my work. You became essential to me, to my happiness, to everything that mattered. Why did you never say anything? Natalie whispered. Because I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid that you did not feel the same way. Afraid of the power imbalance. Afraid that if I confessed and you felt pressured, I would lose you entirely. So I stayed silent, telling myself I was protecting you, when really, I was protecting myself from rejection. Natalie crossed the room until she stood directly in front of him. What if I told you that I have felt the same way? That every small kindness you showed me over 3 years made me fall deeper? That I went out with Tyler trying desperately to forget you because I thought you would never see me as anything more than your assistant? Dominic closed his eyes as if her words were both blessing and torture. Natalie, if I touch you now, I will not want to stop. If we cross this line, there is no going back. She reached up, touching his face gently. Then do not stop. I have waited 3 years for you to cross this line. His control finally shattered. He pulled her to him, and their lips met with 3 years of pent-up longing, desperate and perfect and inevitable. This was not a professional relationship anymore. This was something they had both been denying for far too long. The morning after an HR complications, morning sunlight filtered through the curtains. Natalie woke wrapped in Dominic's arms, feeling simultaneously peaceful and terrified. They had crossed every professional boundary. There was no pretending this had not happened. Dominic stirred, and when he opened his eyes and saw her, pure adoration crossed his features. Good morning, she whispered, reality settling in alongside the happiness. I do not regret this, he said firmly, reading her worrying. Not for a second, but we need to figure out what happens next. Before they could discuss it further, his phone rang. An urgent situation requiring his presence at a breakfast meeting in 30 minutes. Natalie returned to her own suite to prepare. In the hallway, she encountered Preston Blake. When he saw which direction she had come from, his eyebrows rose with knowing malice. Well, he said quietly. Looks like the rumors about Sterling and his assistant might have merit after all. Her blood ran cold. There are no rumors. There will be, Preston said with a smile that made her skin crawl. Interesting timing. Do you not think? Right when his company is negotiating that major merger. Scandal like this could be very damaging. He walked away, leaving Natalie trembling with dread. If their relationship became public this way, it would look sordid. Dominic would be seen as a boss taking advantage of his employee. She would be dismissed as someone who slept her way to better opportunities. Everything he had built could be tarnished by association. At the meeting, Natalie sat behind Dominic, trying to maintain professional composure, but Preston kept casting knowing glances in their direction, and she saw Dominic notice, his jaw tightening with barely controlled anger. When the meeting ended, Dominic pulled her aside. What did Blake say to you? She hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward. He knows about last night, and he implied he would use it against you. Dominic's face hardened. Let me handle Blake. No, Natalie said firmly. That will only make it worse. Dominic, maybe we need to step back. Before this becomes a scandal that damages everything you have built. Step back. He looked at her incredulously. After last night, you want to step back? I do not want to, she said, tears threatening. But I will not be the reason your reputation is destroyed. I will not be the reason your company suffers. You are not a reason for anything negative, Dominic said fiercely. You are the best thing in my life, and I will not lose you because of what small-minded people might think. But the fear in Natalie's eyes remained. The reality of their situation was crushing. Love was not enough when the professional consequences were this severe. The final resolution when they returned to the city on Monday. An HR investigation was already underway. Preston Blake had filed a complaint, and corporate policy demanded a thorough review of any superior-subordinate relationships. Natalie sat in the HR office, facing Rebecca Hart and to corporate lawyers. "Miss Brooks, we need to understand the nature of your relationship with Mr. Sterling." Before Natalie could answer, Dominic entered the room. "There is nothing inappropriate to investigate. Miss Brooks is an exemplary employee, and any suggestion otherwise is defamatory. Mr. Sterling," one of the lawyers began, "if there is a personal relationship, disclosure is required by company policy." "There is," Natalie said suddenly, surprising everyone including Dominic. "There is a personal relationship, but not in the way you are thinking." She looked at Dominic, seeing the shock and hope in his grey eyes. Then she turned back to the lawyers. "The truth is that we fell in love, and I refused to acknowledge it for 3 years because I thought it was impossible. Dominic never took advantage of his position. He never made me feel pressured or uncomfortable. He was more ethical about this situation than anyone I have ever known. If anything, he protected me at the expense of his own happiness." She took a deep breath. "So if our relationship violates any policy, then I resign, effective immediately. I will not let this harm him or his company." The room fell silent. Then Dominic spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "If she resigns, I resign too. I will sell my controlling shares and we will start something new together. Because I choose her over everything else." Rebecca's heart looked between them, then sighed. "That will not be necessary. There are solutions that maintain both ethics and your employment. Mr. Sterling, you have the authority to restructure reporting lines. Miss Brooks could report to another senior executive, eliminating the direct supervisory relationship." Hope flickered. Could it really be that simple? Over the following week, Dominic restructured the organization. Natalie became Director of Strategic Initiatives, reporting to the Chief Operating Officer instead of directly to Dominic. Her qualifications for the role were unquestionable. Her salary increased based solely on market value for her new position. When Preston Blake tried to protest, Dominic invited him to a private meeting where he made it clear that any further interference would result in legal action for harassment and defamation. Preston withdrew his complaint immediately. 6 months later, Natalie stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office, watching the city below. Director of Strategic Initiatives, a position she had earned through her own merit, finally recognized for the contributions she had always made. Dominic appeared in her doorway, and she smiled. They no longer worked in adjacent spaces, which actually made their relationship easier. No constant temptation. No need to hide their feelings during work hours. "Ready for dinner?" he asked. Almost. She gathered her belongings, and they walked to the elevator together. In the privacy of the descending car, he took her hand, and she leaned against his shoulder. "I have been thinking," Dominic said quietly, "about how you believed you were invisible for so long." "I was wrong about that," Natalie admitted. "I see that now. You were never invisible," he said, turning her to face him. "You were always the brightest thing in any room. I was just too afraid to tell you how completely you had captured my attention." The elevator reached the ground floor, and as the doors opened, Dominic pulled a small box from his pocket. Natalie's breath caught. "I know this might seem fast," he said, "but I wasted 3 years being afraid. I do not want to waste another moment. Natalie Brooks, you taught me that love is not weakness. It is the only thing that makes us brave. Will you marry me?" Through tears of joy, she said yes, and as he slid the ring onto her finger, she realized that being invisible had been her own fear, not reality. Dominic had seen her all along. He had just been waiting for the moment when they both had the courage to cross the lines that separated them. Love, it turned out, was worth every risk. And sometimes the best things in life came from having the courage to stop hiding and let yourself be seen.